They were a wealthy California family living the perfect life.
They were well-connected, very successful, wonderful people.
Until it was all shattered by unimaginable violence.
People slain in their own home on Easter Sunday. That was a shock.
This case was like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle.
The investigation would take detectives on a 3-year manhunt ranging from the farms of Fresno to international drug cartels to catch a killer driven by greed.
Some referred to it as Fresno County's crime of the century.
You just couldn't imagine the level of evilness.
April 21st, 1992. Around 9 a.m., police in Fresno, California receive a panicked call from the housekeeper of a local millionaire, 59-year-old businessman Dale Ewell.
Housekeeper Juanita Avita arrived at her usual time. She came into the house and she immediately noticed that a door that leads to the kitchen was closed, which was highly unusual. She went in and at that point saw Tiffany laying face down in a puddle of blood. She then ran over to the neighbor's house and the police were called.
Tiffany Ewell is Dale's 24-year-old daughter. When officers arrive, they immediately see she's been dead for some time.
When we first went inside, you could see as you walked into the kitchen the body of Tiffany. She was laying down with her head kind of pointed towards the southeast next to the dining room table. We surmised that she had been shot in the back of the head, just from where the blood was.
But when police search the rest of the house, they discover Tiffany is not the only victim.
There's a hallway that goes to the east from the dining room. And as we walked that way, it went into like a den or a study area. You could see the body of Glee. And as we walked that direction, you could see that the body of Dale was laying in another hallway just outside the den. He had a bunch of newspapers in his hand underneath him and around him.
They discovered it was not one death, but 3.
Tiffany, her 57-year-old mother Glee, and her father Dale have all been shot. But why would anyone murder a family like the Ewells?
The family was a very prominent family in Fresno County. They were well-connected, very successful, wonderful people, and by all counts, a happy family.
Dale was a retired Air Force pilot from Ohio, and Glee was a former teacher. They'd gotten married in 1961 and moved to California to start a new life together.
Dale was involved in airplane business and made a good living through that as well as through farming. His wife Glee was known for being involved in the community as a volunteer in different ways.
In 1967, Glee gave birth to their first child, Tiffany. Their son Dana came 4 years later in 1971. By then, Dale had become so successful that he invested in agricultural real estate. He soon amassed an $8 million fortune. Glee quit teaching to devote her time to philanthropy.
Glee was a community activist, just a wonderful person who did a great deal of volunteer work within the community.
Glee was a force of nature in a very nice way. She was an appointee to the State Bar Board of Governors. She also became the executive director of the Fresno Regional Foundation.
Everybody seemed to, in most circles, know either Dale or Glee. They were very successful in what they did.
But you'd never know the Ewells were millionaires by looking at them.
Fresno is a great community. We are based in agriculture. Everyone in the community is either a farmer, works for a farmer, or had family that was a farmer.
The Ewells had more wealth than most people in Fresno, and being able to fly airplanes and drive Mercedes and that sort of thing. But, aside from those kinds of trappings, I wouldn't call them a flashy family.
The Ewells did not flaunt their wealth at all. For the amount of money that they were worth, they were very, very conservative.
They made sure their children were given the opportunity to succeed as well. By 1992, Tiffany was a grad student at Fresno State, while Dana was studying business at Santa Clara University.
Glee's children, I gathered, were a bit different. Tiffany, their daughter, was far more quiet, reserved, but wonderful in her way, and Glee would speak glowingly about her.
She was just a very nice young lady who was reserved, did not have a ton of friends that she would socialize with. She was more family-oriented, but everybody who knew her seemed to like her.
Dana was clearly the apple of Glee's eye. She spoke with great passion about his outgoing personality, his intellectual capabilities, his business acumen.
Dana stood out as a intense, well-groomed, corporate type of young man.
Dale and Dana had a fairly good father-son relationship.
They were, by all counts, a happy family.
But now, 3 members of the Ewell family have been brutally murdered, and Fresno police are determined to find out why.
It was what we call a triple, in the fact that this was an affluent family in a decent part of town, and not your typical victims. So the whole unit responded out to this particular scene.
Coming up, if someone is targeting the Ewell family, could Dana be next?
We didn't know if Dana Ewell was still alive. We didn't know if he had not been massacred somewhere between their house and wherever he was. We just didn't know.
Millionaire Dale Ewell, his wife Glee, and their daughter Tiffany have been murdered in their Fresno, California home. And as investigators search the crime scene, the evidence begins to paint a disturbing picture.
A homicide scene tells a story, and this one told a pretty clear story.
The way the bodies were all spread out, it kind of gave us an idea on how the crime had gone down.
It was clear that Tiffany was killed first, that she did not know what was coming. She was just standing in the kitchen and got shot in the back of the head.
She was probably dead before she hit the floor. We believe that Glee saw this happen and actually saw the killer.
Glee then ran from Tiffany's killer, ran into a den that she was shot multiple times.
As she laid on the ground on her side, the killer stood above her, and she actually looked up at him and was trying to basically, I guess, say no. And he shot her again while standing above her.
She had her keys in her hand and in death had a look of fright on her face.
After shooting the 2 women, it appears the killer then ambushed Dale.
As he's walking down the hallway, the killer comes out from a bedroom and shoots him once in the head. And I think he was dead before he hit the ground also.
The blood has dried, which tells police the attack occurred some time ago. But was it the result of a robbery gone wrong, or something else?
There was a box of 9mm shells in the nightstand in the master bedroom. And apparently Dale had a gun that went with that, a 9mm handgun, that was missing.
The home had been ransacked quite a bit, and so the initial thought was that this could be a burglary. But upon closer inspection, there were a lot of inconsistencies with the burglary.
We scoured the house, every entryway, every nook and cranny that anybody could get through that house. No signs of forced entry, the way the drawers were opened and then closed. Burglars didn't do that. You leave them open so you don't touch them twice. It was, we felt, to make it look like a burglary had occurred and that Glee and Tiffany and Dale had interrupted a burglar.
In fact, the evidence seems to suggest that whoever did this was a professional.
Normally, we would expect to find just hair strands, fingerprints, a point of entry. It was incredible how little forensics was able to find in a 4-day inspection.
We really didn't find much of anything except the expended rounds. The precision of the shots, especially to Tiffany and Dale, one shot to the head, this is a hit.
But why would a killer target Dale and his family on Easter weekend? When investigators talked to neighbors, they learned the Ewells spent the holiday weekend at their beach house in nearby Pajaro Dunes. Their son Dana had returned from college to go with them.
We didn't know there was a family member missing until we did some interviews with some people who knew the family. We're concerned that maybe he's to be another victim.
At the time of the murders, Dana was a student at Santa Clara University. Law enforcement had to follow up to make sure that he was safe.
Thankfully, they find Dana safe at school. He flies back to Fresno to speak with investigators.
Dana had said he was trying to reach the family and couldn't.
He did not react in a way that one would expect. He didn't shed tears over it.
Didn't show any emotion. And part of that could have been shock.
Do you know of any reason why anybody would want your family dead? Nothing,
And he said that he didn't know of anyone who would want his family dead, other than saying that his father was involved with some pretty high-level individuals, and he didn't know if any of those people could have wanted his family dead.
Dana tells investigators he last saw his family 2 days ago at Easter dinner. He brought his girlfriend and her family to meet them.
He's dating at the time the daughter of an FBI agent in San Jose.
They invited them to dinner there at the beach house. So there's Dana and Monica, his girlfriend, and then her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Zent. It was apparently a great dinner, and then when they all left,
Dana went back with the Zents to their home. Dale flew home, and Glee and Tiffany drove home.
Dale didn't like all of them flying together or all of them driving together because he was worried that if something were to happen, he didn't want the whole family to die together. He wanted somebody to be alive.
Ironically, that meant Dale would arrive too late to save his wife and daughter. By the time he gets home, his family members have already been killed. But detectives find the timing rather curious.
Tiffany and Glee had gotten home first. When they got into the dining room, the killer was waiting in the family room just around the corner.
Approximately 30 minutes later, Dale ended up coming home through the garage. Why would a person who just committed 2 murders wait 30 to 40 minutes for somebody else to come home? That was very strange.
Coming up, investigators discovered that the Ewells had some powerful enemies.
These people were targeted to die, period. That gets you back to the question, who benefits by this hit?
Three members of the Ewell family have been murdered during the Easter holidays. Police believe the gunman had access to the house, but the sole survivor, the Ewell's son Dana, has an airtight alibi.
At the time of the murders, he's with the FBI agent's family, hours away from the Ewell home.
They checked out everything he had said, and he had been with Monica over in the Santa Clara area.
The autopsy report provides investigators with a few more cryptic clues.
The pathologist recovered the bullets from the bodies, and the bullets looked like something that law enforcement, at least in Fresno, had never seen before.
Some of the expended rounds that we had found in Glee had some really unique striation marks.
The detectives put quite a bit of work into figuring out what could possibly have made those striations.
The bullets turned out to be a match for the ones found on the nightstand in Dale and Glee's bedroom.
We believe that the killer knew that those rounds were there, used those rounds to load up his gun, and committed the murders, and then stole the 9mm also.
There are also traces of a strange substance.
One of the other things we found were microscopic little bitty pieces of yellow fuzz, if you will. Little pieces of yellow material on Glee's clothing. We didn't know what that was.
The evidence only raises more questions. But by now, the triple homicide has made the news, and Fresno police feel the pressure to come up with answers.
It was a case that, frankly, fascinated me. I watched it in the news. I reviewed all the media and wondered where this case was going to end up.
We had to find a motive. So they started to look into backgrounds of Dale, Glee, and Tiffany to see what they could find out. Talking to family members, talking to friends, talking to whoever, find out what they were into.
Dana spoke highly of Tiffany and said that she was a harmless creature and that he couldn't think of anyone who would possibly want to hurt Tiffany.
She was Daddy's little girl. She was very protected by her parents. She had apparently been in an accident when she was younger and received some trauma to her brain. And from everything we could find, she didn't have a mean bone in her body. There was no reason why she needed to be killed.
During the course of the investigation, authorities discovered that Glee hadn't always been an unassuming teacher.
Earlier in her life, she had worked for the CIA. And I went, wow, well, that's a big deal. So that was something they looked into. And it turned out not to be a covert type of position in the CIA. It was something a little less glamorous.
In recent years, she'd become an outspoken civic activist. Was it possible she'd made enemies of the wrong people?
Glee was in a position of power, serving on a high-level state bar committee, and was involved in decision-making that could have led someone to become very upset with her.
People do crazy things, and we didn't know if maybe someone who wanted to be a judge got passed over and just got fed up with it.
We had to eliminate those people as possible suspects.
As investigators dig further, they find out Dale was in business with some dangerous people as well.
He took over a business from a guy who went to prison.
The person who owned Western Piper apparently had gotten some problems with running drugs with planes, and Dale swooped in and bought the company out from under him. The detectives were wondering at the time, is he mad that he lost his business the way he did?
Were the Ewells executed on the orders of a drug runner?
There was a lot of territorial gang violence where gangs were fighting over where the lines were drawn for their territory.
We had the Bloods, we had the Crips, we have NF, or Nuestra Familia. We had an influx of Asian gangs when the Hmongs came into the Central Valley, and a lot of them settled in the Fresno area. But one of our biggest problems was the Bulldog gang. They've been a thorn in the side of law enforcement for a long time in this area. They were kind of independent from everybody else, and there's different sects. They really have no hierarchy. They fight each other. They've been a problem in the Fresno County area for a long time.
Gang murders were pretty much at an all-time high. I believe the murders that year were over 100.
Detectives learned that Dale's plane was stolen the day after the murders. They immediately put out an alert, hoping it might connect them to the cartels. But instead, the lead takes them somewhere unexpected.
Dale apparently had a plane at Western Piper who belonged to an attorney out of Las Vegas. And apparently the plane had needed some work done. The attorney had actually gone and got his plane. He went and jumped in and got his plane out of there. The timing was really bad on the attorney's part. That's something that they talked to him about. He was interviewed, and that was put to rest.
Fresno police have hit a dead end at every turn so far. But have they been asking the right questions?
All the possible motives, it really comes back to who's going to benefit from this.
Coming up, one name keeps coming back to the top of their list.
He studied billionaires. He wrote to billionaires. He asked for jobs with people who were billionaires.
Detectives investigating the Ewell family murders have been unable to come up with any solid leads, but they soon realize that they looked past one suspect a little too early.
Who stands to gain the amount of money that these people are worth? And that came back to Dana.
As the sole surviving family member, Dana stands to inherit Dale and Glee's entire $8 million estate. But is he capable of murder?
Dana's personality was completely the opposite of anybody in his immediate family. I would describe him as eccentric. When he was in high school, he would wear suits and carry a briefcase. He would flash money. He would buy girls that he liked expensive bottles of perfume. Everybody in the school was aware of Dana Ewell and his love for money.
He kept a collection of billionaires. Most kids his age are collecting baseball and football cards, and here he is. His idea of, collecting memorabilia was about people who had become billionaires and millionaires.
He studied billionaires. He wrote to billionaires. We even had some of the copies of letters. We refer to it as the billionaire collection.
He was clearly aiming for a position of prominence in the world and wanted to be regarded as a wealthy businessman.
Investigators have already confirmed Dana was nowhere near his family's home the day of the murders. But his behavior begins to raise suspicion, starting with the funerals.
He was very cheap about buying coffins for his family members, and the way he reacted at the funeral by treating it more like a social event than the way that you would expect any normal human being to act.
He was working the room. He commented on a lady's diamond ring. He was not acting like the grieving son. As detectives, that's where your spidey senses start to come in. Not only did he do that, but he didn't want to cooperate with us anymore. He actually got an attorney, and he wanted us to go through his attorney to talk to him, and which was really bizarre for a sole survivor of a family. Your family's been murdered. You don't want to work with the law enforcement agency that's trying to solve the case.
He acts even more strangely at the reading of the will.
Dana found out for the first time that his father had set up the trust so that he would not get any money until he was 35, which was more than a decade away.
He jumped up and he slammed his hand on the table and he said, "Why did my father do this to me?" And that shocked everyone. Dale's brothers, they said this isn't right, and they brought their concerns to Detective Souza and Detective Burke at that time.
Greed is a powerful motive, and police know that Dana didn't have to pull the trigger himself to be involved.
There are the allegations that young Dana Ewell wants to inherit $7 or $8 million from his parents. He's willing to hire a gunman to kill his mother, his father, his sister on Easter Sunday.
There was a lot of investigation to do up in Santa Clara regarding Dana and just finding out about him and what he was all about.
Classmates tell detectives they should speak with Dana's best friend, Joel Radovich.
It was a weird friendship because Joel was diametrically different than Dana. Dana, this arrogant $1,000 suit rich boy, and Joel, the scrubby, sleeps wherever he can find a place, rides a skateboard, new wave hippie type.
His whole contention that he wasn't really close with Dana and, saw him a little bit, but, they weren't really that as tight as people on campus had made them out to be.
Joel confirms everything Dana told them, but detectives soon discover that both young men are lying.
Now we've got two people that people say are really close, and they're both saying, no, they're not really close. And one of the detectives happened to see Joel driving down the freeway, and he followed him, and he was actually staying at Dana's house.
The hallway still had blood and gray matter from Dale's brain on the sides of the walls. So on a daily basis, Dana and Joel are walking past the blood and gray matter from Dana's father as if it's no big deal.
When we started to key on Dana and Joel as having something to do with the homicides is when we decided to start setting up the surveillances.
For someone unemployed, Joel seems to be living very well.
Dana paid for Joel's helicopter flight lessons in Fresno and didn't even hide it. We were able to show that Dana withdrew $125,000 in cash, that Joel spent about $75,000 in cash.
But Joel hasn't spent all of the money on flight lessons. He's also bought several books that investigators find incriminating.
Books that we were able to discover that Joel obtained was a book called Hitman. It was how you do your job as a professional hitman. It was generally pretty well written, but it had horrible pieces of advice in it. One was, if you are questioned by police, ask, "Are you going to arrest me?" That's exactly what Joel did.
The manual also contains instructions on how to build a silencer.
That coupled with taking the flying lessons, I think he wanted to be an international hitman. You know, I don't know. I don't think he had any other goal in life.
Coming up, investigators believe they've found their gunman. Now they just have to prove it.
We have to put together a really strong case because neither of these individuals had any history of violence.
After a year of investigation, Fresno police are tracking two suspects in the brutal murders of the Ewell family. Dale and Glee's wealth-obsessed son, Dana, and his best friend, Joel, who's been studying to be a hitman. At this point, gone back to school in Santa Clara, and Joel has moved to L.A.
The way they would get a hold of each other was to page each other.
Think back to the early 90s, so we're talking about people still using payphones, people still using pagers.
To keep tabs on the pair, detectives obtain a warrant to clone Joel's pager.
Every time Joel would get a page from Dana, we would get the same page.
There were a couple payphones located at a location not too far from where he lived, and he would go to that location. They were able to basically have all of these different vehicles following Joel and communicating over the radio as to who would take over next. And if you were an expert in surveillance and you were being followed by this group, you would never have known it.
When they started talking, we could send a detective up with a tape recorder in a backpack and go to the other phone and just act like he was having a conversation and hope to get Joel's side of the conversation.
The recordings seem to confirm police suspicions.
He referred to the three-shirt deal, meaning the three family members, and that he needed money and he needed to get out of town.
He actually said, "I want my money and I want it now," because things were stretching out so long. Dana was extremely careful on where he would go, what payphones he would go to, unlike Joel. So it was a little more difficult to get Dana's side of the conversation.
So on May 13th, 1993, investigators paid Dana a visit to try and rattle him.
So they decided to go to Santa Clara University and knock on Dana's dorm door. And Chris Curtis looked at him and said, "We know who killed your family. It was Joel Radovich." Dana then immediately shut the door in Detective Curtis's face.
As soon as we told Dana that we think Joel killed his parents, Dana leaves campus and paged Joel. And that's when things really started to ramp up.
The surveillance team follows Joel to a restaurant in Ontario, California, where they observe him talking to a bartender named Jack Ponce. Detectives want to know why.
Jack Ponce was about the same age as Joel. He and Joel had been friends since they were children.
We need to go and talk to Jack Ponce. Interviewing him was like pulling teeth.
Ponce denies any knowledge of the murders, but after several visits, investigators eventually get him to open up.
You mentioned that the 380, let's go back to that. The 380 was yours, the 22 was yours. Actually, not the 22.
I remember asking him early on if he had a 9mm. He said no, he didn't. I think it was the 5th interview, finally. He goes, I bought a 9mm. I go, what kind of 9mm did you have? Oh, it's an 18-9. It's a really nasty-looking gun. He said he had bought it to shoot squirrels in the attic, which was quite a gun to shoot squirrels with.
Ponce conveniently claims that the gun had been stolen. Hoping to prove it was the murder weapon, investigators compare several 18-9 barrels with the bullet markings from the crime scene.
It just turns out that this particular gun had a very unique twist in the barrel.
The criminalists then recreated the exact silencer that the book described, got an 18-9, and then fired numerous rounds through that silencer.
And that silencer is made with PVC pipe, and you stack it with tennis balls and steel wool. The striation mark came out. They were almost identical to the striation marks on the bullets that were recovered in Glee's body.
The test also explains the fuzzy material found on Glee's clothing.
The fuzz was pieces of tennis ball, the little yellow tennis balls.
Ponce is immediately arrested. It doesn't take him long to turn on Joel Radovich.
He basically spilled it that he had bought the gun, and for Joel.
Ponce says Joel told him exactly how he committed the murders while they were getting rid of the gun.
Joel made the decision to tell Jack what happened, not because he was confessing, but because you're in this too, buddy, and you need to keep your mouth shut.
Joel said, I shaved all the hair off my body except for my eyelashes and my eyebrows so I wouldn't leave any trace, and I was sitting on a plastic sheet waiting for the three to come home.
There were so many different facts that Jack Ponce knew that he couldn't have known on his own, through the media, or from anybody but Joel Radovich.
That level of planning that went into the murders was just something that Fresno hadn't experienced.
Ponce even agrees to show investigators where to find the murder weapon.
Joel gave a bag of gun parts, the murder weapon plus the 9mm that was stolen from the scene, to Jack Ponce to get rid of. Jack said he had thrown the parts at a variety of places down in San Fernando Valley, and the barrel of the murder weapon, he said he buried it in a vacant lot in Reseda.
3 years after the murders, who knows at that point if an apartment building or a house has been built on that lot.
He's handcuffed and shackled. He looks down, he goes, right about here. 2 shovels full, we hit something. Started digging around, it was the barrel. You get that piece of information that you know, that aha moment when you go, this son of a bitch did it.
Coming up, investigators are close to making arrests. But will the rich kid get away with murder?
People will look on the outside and say, well, this will be an easy trial. It was not an easy trial.
Bartender Jack Ponce has confessed to participating in a plot to kill millionaire Dale Ewell and his family. And according to Ponce, 21-year-old Dana Ewell was the one pulling the strings.
He was really a turning point in that case, explaining how Dana devised the plan, how he recruited Joel, and how the whole case unfolded. There was an estate worth $7 or $8 million that he reasoned he would collect if there were no other heirs in front of him.
It takes detectives some time to gather all the evidence, but on March 2nd, 1995, the 2 remaining conspirators are finally arrested.
It took 3 years before investigators could arrest Dana and Joel. Part of that is Dana's alibi, backed up by an FBI agent.
We had to continue the investigation for much longer than would normally be done if the individuals were the types that had a significant criminal history. It would be difficult for a jury to find beyond a reasonable doubt that they committed such heinous murders.
It was 3 counts of murder with 3 special circumstances, so it was a death penalty case.
A string of motions and appeals tie up the case for several more years. Prosecutors use the time to build a stronger case.
This case was like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. There were 162 witnesses who testified in this trial. It was building block upon building block.
They laid out a very clear timeline of how Dana organized it with his friend Joel. He provided himself an alibi by going and seeing his girlfriend and having dinner with her family, and her father was an FBI agent.
In 1997, Dana Ewell and Joel Radovich stand trial. Prosecutors come armed with a money trail they use to argue that Dana paid to have his family killed.
We were able to show that Joel was given $125,000 in cash by Dana for no apparent reason other than tying him to the murders.
Joel wants to be a hitman. Then you look at Dana, and he hires everybody to do his dirty work. You know, throwing the money out there.
Their star witness, Jack Ponce, provides the jury with all the details of the plot. But the defense argues that Ponce is an unreliable witness who is only implicating Dana in exchange for immunity.
Anytime a witness is given immunity, their credibility is going to be suspect.
Dana's attorneys took the tack that you can't believe a word that Ponce says.
His testimony was something I thought should have been inadmissible, but it was, well, Joel Radovich told me that Dana Ewell told him, and so you had what's called double hearsay. So the prosecution had to offer an exception, double exception to the hearsay rule there in order to introduce that.
While Dana may be guilty of choosing the wrong friends, the defense insists there is no actual evidence linking him to the crimes.
They had what you would call guilt by association, the relationship between my client and Joel Radovich. So they had, them living together after the murders at the Ewell residence for a while, the paying for helicopter flying lessons, guilt by association evidence.
After an 8-month trial, the jury finally renders a verdict.
It may have been one of the longest deliberations in a criminal case in Fresno County history.
We returned guilty on all counts and also guilty on all enhancements and allegations.
Some people cried, some people laughed, a whole range of emotions because it was such a long case.
However, there's one thing the jury can't agree on.
In California, it has to be a unanimous death verdict. This wasn't, so that left them with the only thing of life without parole, which is mandatory on a death case if the jury can't decide on death. I was extremely glad that I didn't have to sign that verdict as the foreman sentencing them to death. I was very relieved. Now, I had voted the death penalty, but I was glad I didn't have to sign that paper with my name.
To investigators, it's a fitting sentence. In his greed, Dana Ewell had been willing to do anything to become a billionaire. Instead, he destroyed his family and lost everything, including his freedom.
To see a family massacred and then ultimately by a child strips away a bit of the veneer of our comfort, of our society.
I really believe that Dana had a short circuit or a disconnect. He was arrogant. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. To this day, I have no sympathy for him whatsoever.
This guy's a perfect psychopath.
I have always thought, at least for Dana, that the worst day of his life was not the day that he was arrested. The worst day of his life was not the day he was convicted. The worst day was the day his last appeal expired. And now he knows, every day for the rest of his life, his home is prison.
She was a wealthy businesswoman in love with a ranch hand.
Kathleen was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. Everybody liked her.
He loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Until their Western-style romance went dangerously wrong.
Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
And it's up to investigators to unravel the truth.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
That was the point of no return.
June 27th, 2002. It's a quiet Thursday afternoon in rural Colorado when an Eagle County 911 operator gets a call from a local businesswoman named Kathleen Denson.
She had called 911 to report that she had just shot her boyfriend.
I think it does.
Kathy, you have the gun in your hand.
No, it's on the table.
Kathy, where was he shot?
In his heart. Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
Kathy says the victim is her ex-boyfriend, Gerald Cody Boyd, and claims the shooting was in self-defense.
While on the line with 911, Kathleen Denson was nearly hysterical. She didn't want Cody Boyd to die. She did tell the dispatcher that he was demanding money from her, but she was almost hysterical with the fear that he would die.
Police and paramedics are immediately dispatched to Denson's home, located on a sprawling 77-acre horse ranch in Eagle, Colorado.
Vail is about 15 miles up the river from Eagle. It's a very rich ski town.
I was at the sheriff's office at the time that the call came in, so I was actually one of the first officers on scene. As we're approaching the scene, there's a lot of things going through your mind as an officer. Is she still armed? Are there any other people in the residence? Any dangers that we need to be aware of as we're going up to that?
Officers find Kathy outside, still on the phone with 911.
I'll never forget the scene as going in. You could still smell the discharge of the firearm. You can smell the burnt black powder as you enter the residence. And then we went in and discovered the body in the living room. Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
It's already too late. He is found dead at the scene.
The first thing that I was curious about was what her story was.
There were absolutely no signs of a struggle that we were able to determine at the scene. There was no indication that she had any injuries whatsoever.
Investigators can't help but wonder if there was more to the story than Kathy will admit. From the beginning, Kathleen and Cody's relationship had been unconventional. He was just a simple cowboy, but Kathy had been born into money as the daughter of a successful Colorado furrier.
Her father started that company. She inherited it and grew it.
There's no doubt that Kathleen Denson was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. She ran the first store, and everybody liked her.
She actually had not just the store in Vail that was very successful. She had 2 shops in Aspen, which is about 100 miles away. That was a very successful operation, made her a lot of money, and her shops were known for very high-quality merchandise.
But while selling furs became her profession, horses had always been her passion.
Kathleen was also known by the quarter horse set because she had a lovely 77-acre quarter horse ranch, Dragon A.
She was raising quarter horses. That's not a cheap hobby, so I assume that she was doing very well.
Her ranch, I'm sure, was quite well known, and her breeding operation was quite well known. It was her first stores that made her a wealthy woman. If she had positive income from the ranch, that was a big plus.
In the late 90s, she'd hired Cody Boyd to help her run the place.
He had bounced around the valley already 3 or 4 years here, and he had had odd jobs.
What I can remember about Cody Boyd is he had a strong personality. He also liked to have a good time.
He had a bit of a reputation as a ladies' man because apparently he was charming as hell. He just had this kind of just lovely Western drawl, and he had a twinkle in his eye, and he loved pulp stories, and he loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Cody had been on the job for a few years when he divorced his wife. Soon after, their relationship became more than just professional.
It quickly developed into a romantic relationship. And then she provided for him, both as a handyman as well as her boyfriend.
As the story goes, he eventually went from the bunkhouse out to the ranch house and started living with Kathleen. Here's a wealthy, beautiful woman with money and land. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
In some cases, it's the allure and the mystery, the unknown of really an opposite. So in some cases, the most passionate, fiery love affairs are born of these very different backgrounds.
Despite their differences, Kathy and Cody seemed to be happy together. So how had their romance ended? And why had it resulted in bloodshed?
It's hard to say exactly when things began to go south between Cody Boyd and Kathleen Denson. Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. That's completely at odds with the picture that emerged in the investigation.
Coming up, investigators uncover ties between the victim and organized crime.
Boyd was gregarious, articulate, friendly, but he absolutely had a dark side.
Sheriff's deputies near Vail, Colorado have arrested local businesswoman Kathy Denson for killing her ex-boyfriend, 45-year-old Cody Boyd.
We had a body laying inside the residence. We knew we had a person who claims to have shot the person that's laying inside the residence. So the first thing we got to do is we got to secure that scene.
One of the first things that seems out of place is the murder weapon itself.
She had set the gun down actually on the table in the kitchen.
It was an unusual weapon that she used. It was a black powder gun.
That's one of the oddest things about the Denson case. This was a replica of a 19th century black powder pistol. Hardly the most effective murder weapon out there.
Because it makes a lot of smoke when you shoot them, and there's a recoil, and you have to cock it by the hammer to shoot it, and it's kind of fun to play old-time cowboy and load them and that sort of thing.
It wasn't what you would have used had you had any kind of prior notice that you'd have to defend yourself. In fact, it might have been the last weapon you'd use in that particular home.
But the antique pistol was powerful enough to kill Cody Boyd almost instantly.
Make no mistake about it, that is a very deadly firearm.
Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell that what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
There was no signs of any struggle or any mark other than the gigantic gaping wound of the half-inch metal ball that killed him.
That bullet pushed through almost, I would say, 12 inches or more of bone and flesh.
Investigators find no evidence of a struggle.
As far as around Mr. Boyd, the decedent, we didn't locate anything of suspicious activity around him. There was no other weapons, nothing else that we had found indicating that Mr. Boyd was armed or anything like that.
To get a better sense of Cody and Kathleen's relationship, detectives speak to friends and other employees.
In interviewing the hired hands there at the ranch and also interviewing neighbors, we're talking to those folks to try to help us paint the picture of what kind of person she is, what kind of person Mr. Boyd is.
They discover that the romance had been over for a while now, and money seems to have been the root of the problem.
As far as we know, Cody Boyd had nothing when he came to know Kathleen Denson. He really fit the role of the misfit, the ne'er-do-well, not someone who was successful in life.
The word was that she had paid about $100,000 worth of his business expenses.
Kathleen had purchased like a motorcycle for Cody, had purchased a semi for Cody. I believe there was a Corvette that was purchased as well, but things started going south.
Friends also point to the drastic differences in the couple's personalities. While Kathy was quiet and reserved, Cody was larger than life and liked to tell stories about his checkered past.
Boyd bragged incessantly about his claim that in his prior life he was a mafia hitman, and he certainly had the guns and ammo to make that seem convincing.
The sheriffs discovered on the ranch a big gun safe, and in the gun safe there were at least half a dozen high-powered semi-automatic weapons.
You didn't have to be a very good shot. You just had to hold the trigger down and let the 20 rounds per second be expelled from your firearm. A nasty, nasty set of guns, to be sure.
In fact, it turned out Cody had purchased the antique pistol that killed him.
And it was a Christmas gift to Kathleen, who was living out on the ranch, from Boyd. And that's one of the great ironies of this. This was not a modern firearm. And even an original black powder pistol has a significant percentage of misfires. This is not a safe firearm to be firing, let alone being fired at.
It doesn't seem like the kind of weapon one might choose if they were planning to commit murder, which supports Kathy's story. The medical examiner's autopsy report is also in her favor.
The evidence was pretty clear that he was high on cocaine, and the evidence that she would be legitimately afraid of this man with whom she'd had a long-term romantic relationship.
Cocaine is a stimulant, and it acts on the reward center of the brain, the pleasure center of the brain. So the combination of euphoria with impulsivity and the reduction of the ability to put the brakes on can be a really dangerous combination.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
It seems to be a clear-cut case of self-defense, until a new witness steps forward with a different story to tell. Coming up, Kathy is betrayed by one of her closest friends.
She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
After the first day of the investigation, it looks like modern-day cowboy Cody Boyd was killed by Kathy Denson in self-defense. However, Colorado police are about to learn that his ex-girlfriend's motives might not have been so innocent after all.
So what became apparent as we continued with this investigation was that it appeared that this was some sort of a love triangle. We knew that they were boyfriend-girlfriend, but then there's also this third person that comes into the picture, Monica Seebacher. She goes by Monique.
Monique was I believe a manager for the Vail store and was an employee of Kathleen's for several years.
Kathleen and Monique were basically also best of friends, and that certainly Kathleen confided in Monique.
However, it seems that friendship had been stretched to the breaking point, and when Monique learns about the shooting, she comes forward to tell Eagle County investigators what she knows.
She was a very forthcoming witness and wanted to be able to tell her side of the story. She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
He was in love with me, and things just, started escalating from there.
Monique Seebacher said that the reason why Kathleen Denson shot and killed Cody Boyd was because Cody loved Monique and not Kathy Denson. Now, whether that was true, I don't know.
According to Monique, her relationship with Cody began after Kathy kicked him out of the house.
2 years ago, Kathleen told me that her and Cody were having problems, and I had a 2-bedroom condo. She asked me if he could stay there while, maybe they work some things out.
It turned out to be a little bit of a disaster because Kathleen still loved Cody Boyd. And yet here she is shoving him out of the ranch and into the arms of another woman.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend.
The relationship between Seebacher and Boyd was certainly something that she wasn't thrilled about.
Monique says she tried to preserve her friendship with Kathy, but it was clear that she was still in love with Cody and unwilling to let him move on.
Certainly, Kathleen confided in Monique. I think the evidence showed Monique it wasn't always that straightforward and confiding everything back in Kathleen.
It made things very awkward for Kathleen.
Beyond the exterior, which she was effective, she was savvy, she ran a good business, was I would have to say, a pretty tortured personality and soul, and pretty conflicted.
Monique explains that because both she and Cody depended on Kathy for their livelihoods, they tried their best to keep their romance a secret. She confesses that Kathy's generosity came with other perks as well.
All three of them had pretty strong drug habits, particularly with the drug of choice in the glitzy ski resorts, that being cocaine. And she, Kathleen, had the money to keep them well supplied. Basically, she's supporting him and his drug habit, giving him lavish gifts.
She bought him a car, guns. He basically had money to do whatever he wanted.
But all along, what Cody really wanted was Monique.
For Boyd, he had the best of both worlds. He had a woman that he was getting money from and another woman who seemed to dote on him. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
Monique questioned him, "Why are you still going to see Kathleen?" And he says, "It's just really hard for me to break up with her after all these years." That's pretty unusual, that kind of relationship, and the people involved, they're different. They're definitely different.
Monique says the beginning of the end came a few weeks before the shooting, when Kathleen asked her to help pick out an engagement ring.
There was a lot of talk of marriage, even to the extent that Kathleen had bought Cody a ring and she was going to or getting ready to propose.
Seebacher was a friend, at least that's how Kathleen considered her, and so it made things very awkward.
But the situation grew even more awkward when Kathy confided that she was planning a romantic getaway with Cody to pop the question.
Kathleen wanted to go with Cody to Cancun on a holiday trip. And Cody says, "If Monique cannot go with me and you, I'm not going to Cancun." So Kathleen was forced into kind of taking Monique.
Coming up, it's a tropical vacation none of them would ever forget.
The three of them agreed to go as a group to Cancun, and that's when things really fell apart.
As Colorado detectives untangle the love triangle between Cody Boyd, Monique Seebacher, and Kathy Denson, They begin to realize that Kathy had plenty of motive to kill her former lover. But what would she have to say about her best friend's accusations?
We wanted to find out exactly what happened. What are the circumstances that led up to this, and what led you, the suspect, to shoot the person that ultimately died? And so that's what we were trying to do as far as interviewing Ms. Denson, to get her side of the story, to help put the pieces of this puzzle together.
Under interrogation by Colorado police, Kathy asks for her attorneys and gives them little. But friends present a slightly different story from Monique's.
Kathleen Denson struggled with cocaine use during the period of time that she was with Cody Boyd, and that was part of the problem with him. Everyone wants to be loved, and Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. More and more, Cody Boyd was not just asking for things like a Corvette or a Harley. He was insisting on Kathleen giving him huge sums of money. And that really opened her eyes to what he was really all about.
But drug use and extravagant spending weren't the only dangerous things about him.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people and was a bad hombre.
Kathleen Denson was looking for love in the wrong place, because Cody Boyd was trouble from the get-go.
At first, Cody's bad boy act was a turn-on for Kathy. It wasn't until their trip to Cancun that she realized just how terrifying he could be.
If somebody is highly invested in being an outlaw or a bad boy, then citing gun ownership or citing violence that they may have perpetrated demonstrates to another person that they've attained this level of expertise or competence in their so-called domain.
Kathy financed the luxurious trip and says that when she agreed to bring Monique with them, she didn't know Cody had ulterior motives.
The trip to Cancun was between Monique, Cody, and Kathleen. And during that trip is when Kathleen had started to realize that there was a relationship going on between Cody and Monique.
She brought a ring to Cancun to propose marriage, and he had turned her down.
It would have been horrible to find out that your boyfriend, your lover, is with your best friend when you took them on vacation with you.
She could no longer deny or explain in her own mind the fact that she was really not the love object of Cody.
Once you discover that you would feel betrayed.
But the trip had ended in far more than just a broken heart.
In Cancun, there was a heated argument, and according to Kathleen Denson, she was beaten up by Cody Boyd, flew back to Denver, and stayed basically in isolation because she didn't want to see anybody, and she didn't want anybody to see her blackened eyes and her very, very injured face.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend and with someone that worked for her. Someone who at some point in time was considered a confidant to her. And she had enough.
That was really the breaking point. That was the point of no return for Kathleen Denson.
When they returned to the U.S., Cody finally left the ranch and moved in with Monique. She was doing her best to move on from the betrayal when he unexpectedly showed up at her doorstep on June 27th.
On the day of the shooting, Kathleen Denson dropped her vehicle in town. She intended to take her 4Runner out on the road. She wanted to get some windshield time, some time for herself, and she enjoyed driving. When she got back to the ranch, it wasn't too long before Cody Boyd entered and began to threaten her.
Kathleen has said that he was trying to coerce her to give her another $300,000.
Fearing for her life, Kathy reached for something to defend herself with. and wound up grabbing the antique pistol he'd given her. But in light of what they've learned so far, investigators find Kathy's version of events difficult to believe.
There were a number of different things that just didn't make sense in regards to what she was saying.
Cody was moving out his things from Kathleen's ranch and moving them into Monique's because he was going to live full-time with Monique. He didn't bring a weapon. He didn't have a gun.
On July 1st, 2002, 5 days after Cody's death, Eagle County prosecutors decide to formally charge Kathy Denson with second-degree murder.
This was the first homicide that I had investigated where there was this love triangle, and it just really muddies the water because there's so many different moving pieces.
I had concerns with a lot of people's credibility in the case. And that was an obstacle that we had to figure out, okay, what do we know versus what people exaggerate.
Coming up, the prosecution is betting that the evidence will prove their case. But will it be enough to get a conviction?
It was clear that she was a woman who was both terrified of the fact that she was charged with murder and horrified by the fact that she had had to commit murder.
"45-year-old millionaire Kathy Denson has been charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend Cody Boyd. If convicted, Kathy faces up to 48 years behind bars, but her attorneys seem confident she will be acquitted.
The prosecutors had an enormous burden. They had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kathleen Denson did not act in self-defense. And from my perspective, the deck was stacked in favor of the defense.
He entered the home angry, came at her, and she picked up the black powder gun that just happened to be in the room and shot him. And it ended up killing him.
Based on the evidence, however, prosecutors are convinced Kathy wasn't motivated by fear. She was out for revenge.
He wasn't grabbing your neck. He wasn't brandishing a heavy object. They were having a heated conversation. Does that give one a license to kill somebody because you have an argument in your house and you are able to shoot them dead in the middle of the afternoon?
We had to show that there was a reason for the murder, that there was motive. But then at the same time, we also had to show that this also was not justified murder.
Prosecutors say that evidence taken during a search of Kathy's ranch house supports their case.
There was drug paraphernalia in the residence. There were a lot of videos that we had to go through.
There was a video of them snorting some drugs, we presume cocaine.
What got more publicity was the exotic gun collection and these videotapes that Cody and Kathleen made of themselves engaged in various sexual activities.
There was no indication of any type of violence being used. It looked very consensual, very caring.
The prosecution believes Kathy was still desperately in love with Cody.
The picture that was being painted was that Kathleen was a scorned ex-lover. She was not happy with Mr. Boyd. She had given him all these things to try to win his love, and she was just very upset. And then he came back that day. Kathleen just couldn't stand the thought of Cody not being with her anymore.
And while Kathy claims that Cody had a history of violence, the truth is he'd been lying to her from the start.
Cody Boyd was known to say a number of different things, grandizing himself maybe more than what he really was. It was something to take note of, but there was absolutely no evidence that he was any type of mafia hitman or hitman at all.
I'm not aware of any prior criminal history on his part. I'm not saying he didn't have any, but if he did, it certainly wasn't significant enough to leave an impression on us.
One of his kinks was trying to get respect as a feared hitman when there was zero evidence to show he had anything to do with that.
Prosecutors argue that because Cody posed no actual threat, Kathy never had a reason to shoot him.
She had no injuries. There was no indication that she had been in a struggle or that she was in fear.
And interestingly, Kathleen never claimed. She said he kept coming at me. I was frightened. She never claimed there was any physical contact between the two.
And ballistics evidence from the scene appears to prove the distance between them.
When a gun fires, it creates stippling from the burning gunpowder. He had stippling from below his knees, on his pants, up on his face, to the top of his head. That means that the cone of burning gunpowder was in excess of 4 feet.
The prosecution noted that there were 2 doors that Kathleen could have fled out of instead of picking up the revolver and shooting the guy.
They believe that once Kathy had made her choice, her intent was clear: to kill the man who betrayed her.
Kathleen Denson was not a stranger to firearms, but was hardly an expert markswoman. At the distance that she had to fire that black powder pistol, it would have been hard to miss center mass, and that's what she aimed for.
She took a very drastic course of action for which there was no coming back.
However, Kathy sticks to her claim of self-defense, and her attorneys argue that it doesn't matter whether Cody presented any actual danger. For her, perception was reality.
Kathleen Denson really believed that Cody Boyd was a hitman, maybe in a prior life, or maybe even then. Mostly, she knew he was the kind of guy that wouldn't hesitate to hurt her. He'd already done it in Cancun.
Mr. Robinson's theory was clearly that Boyd was attacking her and was about to commit or had committed a crime against her.
Coming up, the defense's argument gets put to the test.
It was a self-defense case involving a woman who was scared to death of a man who was in her home. What defense lawyer wouldn't want a case like that?
Prosecutors in Eagle County, Colorado have finished arguing their case for murder. Now it's the defense's turn to convince the jury that Kathy Denson only shot Cody Boyd to save her own life. Their argument hinges on the state's home defense statute, known as the Make My Day Law.
Under that law, Kathleen Denson had a right to use deadly force, even if all that would have happened would be getting beaten up again by Cody Boyd. She didn't have to let him hurt her before she could use deadly force.
Over the course of their relationship, Cody had built himself up as a dangerous hitman, so Kathy had every reason to believe he would kill her.
He had military-style weapons. He had conversions of automatic and semi-automatic weapons. He had the large banana clips. He was everybody's nightmare in a world where mass shootings have become all too commonplace. An astronomic number of firearms were in the home.
Some of them were altered to be fully automatic weapons.
To prove their point, the defense makes a surprising move, asking Kathy to describe what happened in her own words.
Kathleen's attorney, Scott Robinson, put Kathleen on the stand, which is pretty unusual in a murder trial because, you could say something wrong and cook your own goose.
When Kathleen testified. She was impeccably dressed. Very attractive woman, very poised, articulate.
Appearance, dress, manner of speech, the way somebody wears their hair, the number of ums that they say. All of these things can impact jurors' perception of the credibility of a witness.
Kathy testifies that when Cody Boyd showed up at the ranch that day, he was enraged and also appeared to be high.
Cody Boyd had really wretched teeth, and Kathleen had agreed to pay for a complete restoration. Boyd was showed in the bill $20,000, and he was quite upset. She's immediately frightened because he looks crazed. He looks angry. He demands money.
One of the defense's pathologists did an autopsy on his own of Cody and found cocaine, and they found a sleep drug, I think halcyon, and they found, I think, THC from marijuana. And the pathologist said, these drugs could cause some people to get hostile.
He was in a drug-induced rage and was coming at her.
The fact that he claimed to have a darker past certainly played a factor.
The defense argues that whether Kathy intended to kill him or not, Cody had left her with little choice.
The defense felt that Mr. Boyd was coming down there, was being hostile and aggressive towards Miss Denson, and she felt no other recourse other than to defend herself.
Oftentimes, emotions will lead to immediate behavioral responses on people's parts. So there's no cooling off period. There's no time to think and to let the emotion calm down.
The timeline was easily established because he had just been at the dentist. We know exactly when the 911 call went in. So there really wasn't much of a delay between Boyd arriving at the ranch and Boyd receiving the fatal shock. Cody Boyd was high, he was angry, and he was going to go get what he had coming. Of course, as things turned out, he got exactly what he had coming.
But would the jury agree?
It was a very stone-faced jury. They were very hard to read.
The jury has a tough job to do. They're weighing somebody's life in their hands, and, they have to go with the information that was given here.
After only 2 hours, they return with their verdict. To the surprise of many, they find Kathy Denson not guilty.
The jury decided that she did not commit a crime, but it was a homicide. It was a death caused by another person.
Whether the jury acquitted Kathleen Denson because of the Make My Day statute or the self-defense statute or some combination of both, we'll never know.
Only 2 people were there that actually know exactly how it transpired. One of them was dead.
Everybody went home that day except for Cody.
It's a tragic case. It's tragic because I think a lot of people didn't feel that justice was served.
What began as the unlikely romance between a wealthy rancher and an itinerant cowboy has ended in betrayal and bloodshed. But the question remains, who is ultimately to blame?
Miss Seebacher, when she took the stand, there were a lot of inconsistencies with what she had said. So, it painted to the jury that she was not very credible, that, maybe she's a scorned person in this particular case. So I'm trying to seek revenge on Miss Denson.
The people who knew Kathleen Denson believed in her. There was no backlash. The impact on Kathleen Denson was a lot more subtle. Quite frankly, she has never gotten over the trauma of shooting and killing Cody Boyd.
跟这并一块儿，我都应该坐中间来啊。谢谢喵敏，谢谢喵敏的幽默。大海，爱是我的。这缆车多少钱？60块钱往返，大家没？哎，咱家有40级的哥们儿喊个喇叭吗？随便看大海，或者边发秦皇岛，帮我喊个喇叭行吗？40级大哥喊个。
Wonder if I could bring them to live. I could bring my lover. And baby, you make me wait. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Waiting you. Back there again, I saw the looking out of the window. Wonder if I could bring them down. I could bring my love now, baby. You make.
Shorty, if you really wanna go, then you gotta take me the mess. I tried to soak in all the years and take it all in, but I come up for a breath and cry. I gave my drama, gave my simple, gave my friends a helping hand. I bet you know that they are dead. I wish I could tell you this. The talk is not a tongue. The more we talk, the talk is not a tongue. I did not come this far for any stronger. All of a sudden there was nothing left. Well, last night a doctor found you were lying. I never meant to keep you alive. There might be stuff we said that sound dumb to you, but to get a red wine and take it with a lid.